Let us continue our reading of Plato's first Alcibiades. To establish the context, we'll back up a bit and pick up just before we ended the last part of our reading. Socrates asks, "Can we ever know what art would improve or make a man's self better, so long as we are ignorant of what we ourselves are?" "Impossible," says Alcibiades. "Let me ask you then, whether it happens to be an easy thing to know oneself, and whether he was some person of mean attainments in knowledge, he who put up this inscription in the temple of Pytho, or is it a piece of knowledge difficult to be attained and not obvious to everyone?" Alcibiades says, "To me, Socrates, it has often seemed easy and obvious to everyone, and often too at other times a thing of the greatest difficulty." Socrates, "But whether in itself it be an easy thing or not, with respect to us, Alcibiades, the state of the case is this: had we attained to that piece of knowledge, we should perhaps know what it is to take care of ourselves. But never can we know this so long as we remain ignorant of that." Alcibiades, "These are truths which I acknowledge." Socrates, "Come then, by what means might it be found what is the very self of everything? For so we might perhaps find what we ourselves are. But so long as we continue in the dark as to that point, it will be no way possible to know ourselves." Alcibiades, "You are certainly in the right." Socrates, "Attend now. I conjure you in the name of Jupiter, with whom is it that you are at this present time discoursing? Is it not with me?" "It is," says Alcibiades. "And am I not discoursing with you?" "You are." "It is Socrates, then, who is discoursing and arguing." "Quite true," says Alcibiades. "And Alcibiades is attentive to his arguments." "He is." Socrates, "Is it not by reason that Socrates thus argues in discourse?" "Undoubtedly," says Alcibiades. "And is not to argue in discourse the same thing as to reason?" Alcibiades answers, "Quite the same." Socrates, "But is not the person who uses a thing different from the thing which he uses?" Alcibiades asks, "How do you mean?" Socrates, "As a shoemaker, for instance, cuts his leather with the shears and the paring knife and other tools." Alcibiades, "Well, he does so." Socrates, "Is not then the shoemaker who cuts the leather and uses those tools in cutting it different from the tools which he uses?" "Without doubt," says Alcibiades. Socrates, "Are not in like manner the instruments on which a musician plays different things from the musician himself?" "Certainly," says Alcibiades. Socrates, "It was in this sense that just now I asked you whether you thought that in all cases the person who used a thing was different from the thing which he used." Alcibiades, "I think he is." Socrates, Now then, to resume the instance of the shoemaker, what say we? Does he cut the leather with his tools only, or also with his hands? With his hands also, says Alcibiades. He therefore uses also these, says Socrates. He does. Socrates. And does he not use his eyes also when he is cutting the leather? He does, says Alcibiades. And are we agreed that the person who makes use of any things is different from the things which he makes use of? We are, says Alcibiades. Socrates. The shoemaker, then, and the musician are different from the hands and eyes with which they perform their operations. It is apparent, says Alcibiades. Socrates. And does not a man use also his whole body? Most certainly, says Alcibiades. Now the user is different from the thing used. True, says Alcibiades. A man, therefore, is a being different from his body. It seems so, says Alcibiades. What sort of being, then, is man? I know not, says Alcibiades. Socrates. But you know that man is some being who makes use of the body. True, says Alcibiades. Does any being make use of the body other than the soul? None other, says Alcibiades. And does it not so do by governing the body? It does, says Alcibiades. Further, says Socrates, I suppose that no man would ever think otherwise than this. Alcibiades asks, then what? Socrates, that a man himself was one of these three things. What three things? Socrates, soul, or body, or a compound of them both, constituting the whole. Alcibiades asks, what besides could be imagined? Socrates, now we agreed that the being which governs the body is the man. We did, says Alcibiades. What being, then, is the man? Doth the body itself govern itself? Alcibiades answers, by no means. Socrates, for the body, we said, was governed. True, says Alcibiades. The body, then, cannot be that being which we are in search of. It seems not, says Alcibiades. But whether does the compound being govern the body, and whether is this the man? Perhaps it is, says Alcibiades. Least of any of the three can this be so, says Socrates. For of two parties, one of which is the party governed, there is no possibility that both of them should govern jointly. Right, says Alcibiades. Socrates, since then neither the body nor the compound of soul and body together is the man, it remains, I think, either that a man's self is nothing at all, or, if it be anything, it must be concluded that the man is no other thing than soul. Clearly so, says Alcibiades. Socrates, needs it then to be proved to you still more clearly that the soul is the very man? Alcibiades, it needs not, by Jupiter, for the proofs already brought seem to me sufficient. Socrates. If it be proved tolerably well, though not accurately, 'tis sufficient for us. For we shall then perhaps, and not before, have an accurate knowledge of man's self, when we shall have discovered what we just now passed by as a matter which required much consideration. Alcibiades asks, what is that? Socrates. That of which was said some such thing as this, that in the first place we should consider what is self itself, whereas instead of this, we have been considering what is the proper self of every man. And this indeed, for our purpose, will perhaps suffice. For we could by no means ever say that anything was more peculiarly and properly oneself than is the soul. Certainly we could not, says Alcibiades. We may not then fairly, or may we not then fairly thus determine that we are conversing one with another by means of reason, you and I, soul with soul? Quite fairly, says Alcibiades. Socrates. This, therefore, was our meaning when we said a little before that Socrates discoursed with Alcibiades, making use of reason. We meant, it seems, that he directed his words and arguments not to your outward person, but to Alcibiades himself, that is, to the soul. Alcibiades. It seems so to me too. Socrates. He therefore enjoins a man to recognize the soul. He who gives him this injunction to know himself. He enjoins a man to recognize the soul. He who gives this injunction to know thyself. Alcibiades says, that is probably his meaning. Socrates. Whoever then has a knowledge only of his body has indeed attained the knowledge of what is his, but not the knowledge of himself. Just so, says Alcibiades. None, therefore, of the physicians, says Socrates, so far as he is only a physician, knows himself. Neither does any master of the exercise, so far as he is such a master and nothing more. Alcibiades. It seems they do not. Socrates. Far from knowing themselves, then, are husbandmen and other artificers or workmen. For such men as these are ignorant, it seems, of the things which are theirs, and knowing only in subjects still more remote the mere appurtenances to those things which are theirs, so far as their several arts lead them. For they are acquainted only with things appurtenant to the body, to the culture and service of which body these things administer. Alcibiades. What you say is true. Socrates. If therefore wisdom consists in the knowledge of oneself, none of these artificers are wise men by their skill in their respective arts. I think they're not, says Alcibiades. On this account, says Socrates, it is that these arts seem mechanical and mean, and not the learning fit for a man of a virtuous merit. Entirely true, says Alcibiades. To return to our subject, whoever then employs his care in the service of his body takes care indeed of what is his, but not of himself. Alcibiades. There is danger of its being found so. Socrates. And whoever is attentive to the improvement of his wealth is not taking care either of himself or of what is his, but of things still more remote, the mere appurtenances to what is his. Alcibiades. It seems so to me too. Socrates. The man, therefore, who is intent on getting money is so far not acting for his own advantage. Rightly concluded, says Alcibiades. It follows also that whoever was an admirer of the outward person of Alcibiades did not admire Alcibiades, but something which belongs to Alcibiades. Alcibiades agrees. You say what is true. Socrates. But whoever is your admirer is the admirer of your soul. Alcibiades. It appears to follow of necessity from our reasoning. Socrates. And hence it is that the admirer of your outward person, when the flower of it is all fallen, departs and forsakes you. So it appears, says Alcibiades. But the admirer of a soul departs not, so long as that soul goes on to improve itself. Probably so, says Alcibiades. I am he then, says Socrates, who forsakes you not, but abides by you. When the flower of youth having left you, the rest of your followers have left you and are gone. Alcibiades. It is kindly done of you, Socrates, and never do you forsake me. Socrates. Exert all your endeavors, then, to be as excellent a man as possible. Alcibiades says, I will do my best. Socrates. For the state of your case is this, Alcibiades. The son of Clinias never, it seems, had any admirer, neither has he now, besides one only, and therefore to be cherished, this Socrates here, the son of Sophroniscus and Phenarete. 'Tis true, says Alcibiades. Did you not say, says Socrates, that I had been a little beforehand with you when I accosted you? For that you had it in your mind to address me first, and you wanted to ask me why of all your admirers I was the only one who forsook you not. Alcibiades. I did say so, and that was the very case. Socrates. This then was the reason. 'Twas because I was the only person who admired you. The others admired that which is yours. That which is yours has already dropped its flower, and the spring season of it is past, whereas you yourself are but beginning to flourish. If therefore the Athenian populace corrupt you not, and make you less fair, I never shall forsake you. But this is what I chiefly fear, that you may come to admire and court the populace, and be corrupted by them, and we should lose you, since many of the Athenians, men of virtuous merit too, have been thus corrupted before now. For the people of magnanimous Erechtheus has an outward person fair and engaging to behold, but we ought to strip it of all its showy dress and view it naked. Use therefore the caution which I give you. What caution? asks Alcibiades. In the first place, my friend, exercise yourself and acquire the knowledge of those things which are necessary to be learnt by every man who engages in political affairs. But engage not in them until you are thus exercised and thus instructed, that you may come to them prepared with an antidote and suffer no harm from the poison of the populace. Alcibiades. What you say, Socrates, to me seems right, but explain, if you can, more clearly how or in what way we should take care of ourselves. Socrates says, Is not this then sufficiently clear to us from what has been already said? For what we are has been tolerably well agreed on. Indeed, before that point was settled, we feared lest we should mistake it and imagine that we were taking care of ourselves when the object of our care all the while was some other thing. This is true, says Alcibiades. Socrates. Upon that, it was concluded by both of us that we ought to take care of the soul, and that to this we should direct all our attention and regard. It was evident, says Alcibiades, and that the care of our bodies and our possessions should be delivered over to others. Alcibiades. We could not doubt it. Socrates. In what way, then, may we attain to know the soul itself with the greatest clearness? For when we know this, it seems we shall know ourselves. Now, in the name of the gods, whether are we not ignorant of the right meaning of that Delphic inscription just now mentioned? Alcibiades. What meaning? What have you in your thoughts, O Socrates, when you ask this question? Socrates. I will tell you what I suspect that this inscription means, and what particular thing it advises us to do. For a just resemblance of it is, I think, not to be found wherever one pleases, but in only one thing, in the sight. How do you mean? Asks Alcibiades. Socrates. Consider it jointly now with me. Were a man to address himself to the outward human eye, as if it were some other man, and were he to give it this counsel, see yourself, what particular thing should we suppose that he advised the eye to do? Should we not suppose that 'twas to look at such a thing, as that the eye, by looking at it, might see itself? Certainly we should, says Alcibiades. What kind of a thing, then, do we think of by looking at which we see the thing at which we look, and at the same time see ourselves? Alcibiades. 'Tis evident, O Socrates, that for this purpose we must look at mirrors and other things of the like kind. Socrates says, you are right. And has not the eye itself, with which we see, something of the same kind belonging to it? Most certainly it has, says Alcibiades. Socrates. You have observed, then, that the face of the person who looks in the eye of another person appears visible to himself in the eyesight of the person opposite to him, as in a mirror. And we therefore call this the pupil, because it exhibits the image of that person who looks in it. What you say is true, says Alcibiades. An eye, therefore, beholding an eye, and looking in the most excellent part of it, in that which it sees, may thus see itself. Apparently so, says Alcibiades. But if the eye look at any other part of the man, or at anything whatever, except what this part of the eye happens to be like, it will not see itself. It is true, says Alcibiades. If therefore the eye would see itself, it must look in an eye, and in the place of the eye, too, where the virtue of the eye is naturally seated, and the virtue of the eye is sight. Just so, says Alcibiades. Socrates. Whether then is it not true, my friend Alcibiades, that the soul, if she would know herself, must look at soul, and especially at that place in the soul in which wisdom, the virtue of the soul, is ingenerated, and also at whatever else this virtue of the soul resembles? Alcibiades says, to me, Socrates, it seems true. Socrates. Do we know of any place in the soul more divine than that which is the seat of knowledge and intelligence? We do not, says Alcibiades. This, therefore, in the soul resembles the divine nature. And a man, looking at this, and recognizing all that which is divine, and God, and wisdom, would thus gain the most knowledge of himself. Alcibiades says, it is apparent. Socrates, and to know oneself we acknowledge to be wisdom. By all means, says Alcibiades. Socrates, shall we not say, therefore, that as mirrors are clearer, purer, and more splendid than that which is analogous to a mirror in the eye, in like manner God is purer and more splendid than that which is best in our soul? Alcibiades says, it is likely, Socrates. Socrates, looking therefore at God, we should make use of him as the most beautiful mirror. And among human concerns, we should look at the virtue of the soul. And thus, by so doing, shall we not especially see and know our very selves? Yes, says Alcibiades. If then we are not wise, but ignorant of ourselves, can we know what our good is and what our evil? How is it possible that we should, Socrates? Socrates. For perhaps it appears impossible for a man who knows not Alcibiades himself to know anything which relates to Alcibiades as having that relation. Impossible it is, by Jupiter. Socrates. Neither then can anything which is our own be known by us to be our own any other way than through the knowledge of ourselves. We'll stop here in our reading of Plato's first Alcibiades.